I'm Olivia Hayes, 34 years old, and I've learned the hard way, a lesson etched deep into my very being, that sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers you pass on the street. No, those wounds, the ones that fester and ache for years, they come from the people who are supposed to love you the most, the ones whose approval you crave like oxygen. My father, William Hayes, was the kind of man who built his world and ours on the unshakable foundations of discipline, tradition, and an almost suffocating pride. He hadn't just worked for a company. He'd forged Hayes and Sons Construction from the ground up, a testament to his grit and business acumen. Or so he often reminded us. That company, H&S Construction, was his lifeblood, his monument. His two sons, my older brothers, Ethan and Noah, were destined to be his legacy, the heirs to his concrete and steel kingdom. And me? I was Olivia, the one who dealt in algorithms and data, a world he neither understood nor valued. I was just there, an inconvenient variable in his carefully constructed equation of family. The night before his retirement party, a lavish affair I was already dreading, I stood in my study, the cool glow of the projector casting my speech draft onto the wall. My actual office at Innovatech Solutions was miles away in San Francisco, but this room, surrounded by shelves groaning under the weight of books on AI, machine learning, and quantum computing, was my sanctuary. I paced, the words I'd meticulously crafted feeling hollow, like a foreign language I was struggling to pronounce. A few polite words, a toast, maybe something neutral, safe, expected. I muttered to the empty room, the irony stinging. Because that's how I'd navigated most of my 34 years, trying to shrink myself, to avoid giving Dad more reasons to look at me with that familiar, soul-crushing disappointment. On my desk, beside a replica of a complex mathematical puzzle from my childhood, a rare moment of shared intellectual curiosity with him. Or so I'd once believed, lay a small, stark white card. The gift wasn't wrapped in elegant paper. Its power lay in its simplicity, its raw, unvarnished truth. The puzzle, a painstaking recreation of a problem we'd just once, tackled together, or rather, I had, while he watched with a fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of interest. The note beside it read, "This was the only time our minds ever truly met. I wonder, you even remember the thrill of solving it, Dad? Or was I just another calculation you couldn't quite place?" It was a desperate, bitter attempt to connect, to remind him of a different kind of value, a different kind of success. As I ran through the pre-scripted lines of a daughter's dutiful tribute, I couldn't shake the heavy, sinking feeling that something was fundamentally, irrevocably wrong. That no matter what I said, no matter how carefully I chose my words, it wouldn't matter. Because in his eyes, no matter what I achieved in my world, it never truly did. The memory of a childhood math competition flashed through my mind, a triumphant first-place trophy gathering dust while praise was heaped on Ethan's Little League home run. "It's just numbers, Olivia," Dad had said, ruffling my hair with a dismissive air. "Real success is built with your hands, with bricks and mortar." Later that evening, during a video call, my best friend Chloe Miller, her face a welcome sight on my laptop screen, tried to dissuade me from even going. "Liv, why do you put yourself through this?" she'd asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. "You know how these things go. You'll get your hopes up, and he'll be himself." "I know, Chloe, I know," I'd sighed, running a hand through my hair. But a part of me, a stupid, stubborn part, still hopes. Maybe this time. Maybe because it's his retirement. "You're just setting yourself up to be hurt again," she'd warn gently. "You're the lead on the Orion Initiative, for crying out loud. You don't need his validation." She was right, of course. My work on the Orion Initiative AI project at Innovatech was groundbreaking. I was a respected leader in my field. But the sting of familial disregard was a peculiar kind of ache, one that professional success couldn't entirely soothe. Before I go any further, tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Your accomplishments minimized or misunderstood by those whose validation you secretly, desperately craved. Have you ever been overlooked? Your worth seemingly invisible to someone who is supposed to see you, truly see you? If this resonates, if even a small part of this feels achingly familiar, let me know. This story, my story, might echo some of your own, and maybe, just maybe, processing it together will help us both see things and ourselves a little differently. Growing up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the Hayes house on Hemlock Lane was a monument to my father's idea of order, impeccably maintained, steeped in tradition, and for me, utterly suffocating. We weren't poor by any stretch of the imagination. Dad's construction business, Hayes and Sons Construction, had seen to that. But affection, genuine warmth, that was a currency strictly rationed, as if dispensing it too freely would somehow devalue his authority or, worse, spoil us. My brothers, Ethan 3 years my senior, and Noah, just a year older than me, were the golden boys, destined to inherit Dad's empire. They were groomed for leadership in H&S construction, their paths paved with paternal approval. Ethan, with his easy charm, was already a rising star in the company's sales department, clearly the heir apparent. Noah, more hands-on, was excelling as a site manager, respected for his practical skills. Dad adored them, his pride palpable whenever he spoke of their contributions to the family business. In his eyes, they could do no wrong. Their futures were as solid and dependable as the foundations they poured. And then there was me, Olivia, the anomaly. I was quiet, intensely curious, and from a young age, utterly obsessed with the elegant logic of mathematics and the boundless potential of programming. While other girls my age might have been sneaking fashion magazines into their rooms, I was devouring books on algorithms and coding languages, my mind alive with patterns and possibilities. I remember when I was 11, I developed a small inventory management program for Mom's charity bake sales, a rudimentary thing, but it worked flawlessly. It even helped them track their best-selling cookies. My mother, Eleanor, had clapped her hands, her smile genuine and proud, a small, warm sunbeam in our usually overcast, emotional landscape. "That's wonderful, Olivia," she'd exclaimed. "You're so clever." My father, however, had merely grunted from behind his newspaper. "A girl spending all her time on those complicated computer things," he'd muttered, not even looking up. "Shouldn't you be learning something more useful? Something a young lady might actually need?" The implication was clear. Useful meant domestic, and lady meant not outshining his sons in anything he deemed important. I learned early on, with a certainty that settled like a stone in my young heart, that I didn't fit his carefully constructed mold for a Hayes. He never had to say it outright. "You're a disappointment." Or, "Why can't you be more like your brothers?" He didn't need to. His actions, his omissions, spoke volumes. It was there in the strained silence when I proudly showed him my perfect score on a state-wide math Olympiad. It was in the way his eyes would glaze over if I tried to explain a particularly fascinating coding challenge I'd overcome. It was most glaringly obvious at the endless stream of dinner parties and company functions, where he'd introduce my brothers with a booming voice, his chest puffed with pride. "This is my son Ethan," he'd announced to some business associate, a proprietary hand on Ethan's shoulder. "He's already a key player in our sales division, a natural leader. And this is Noah, a brilliant site manager, knows the ins and outs of every project. These boys are the future of Hayes and Sons Construction." Then, almost as an afterthought, his gaze would flick to me, standing awkwardly by the potted ferns. A polite, almost dismissive smile would touch his lips. "And that's my daughter, Olivia." A brief pause, as if searching for something appropriate to say. "She's very interested in computers. Keeps herself busy with all that tech stuff, you know." "Computers," he'd say, as if it were a slightly embarrassing, albeit tolerated, hobby, like collecting stamps or knitting. A harmless pastime, certainly not a serious pursuit, and definitely not comparable to the real work his sons were doing. The word hobby hung in the air, a subtle but effective dismissal of my passion, my intellect, and my burgeoning career path. It was his way of diminishing what he didn't understand, or, perhaps, what he didn't want to. Despite the chilly atmosphere at home, I poured myself into my studies with a fierce determination. I graduated with a master's in computer science from Stanford University, my grades consistently at the top of my class, all while juggling scholarships and multiple part-time jobs to cover every penny of my tuition and living expenses. I was fiercely independent, determined not to owe my parents, especially Dad, anything. I still remember the hollow ache on graduation day. The sun was bright over Palo Alto, the air filled with the excited chatter of families, but our seats, the ones I'd hopefully reserved, remained empty. No one from my family came. Not Dad, not Mom, not Ethan, not Noah. Later that evening, a terse email from Mom arrived, her words stilted and apologetic. "Olivia, dear, congratulations on your graduation. So sorry we couldn't make it. Your father had an urgent, last-minute meeting with a major client for Hayes and Sons. You know how it is." I did know. I knew all too well that urgent business was the standard excuse. My academic triumphs were, at best, an inconvenience to his schedule. Still, I tried, didn't I? A part of me, the part that hadn't yet fully calcified against the cold, still yearned for some sign of recognition. I took the job that, back in Bridgeport, no one in my family truly understood or perhaps even believed was real. A data scientist at Innovatech Solutions in San Francisco, one of the leading tech firms in the country. I dove headfirst into the exhilarating world of artificial intelligence, working grueling hours, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. I co-authored research papers, published in prestigious journals, secured patents for novel algorithms, and quickly rose through the ranks. I remember the thrill when I won an international AI programming competition, a significant achievement in my field. When I called home to share the news, Dad's response was a curt, "Oh, that's nice, Olivia. Good for you." His tone was so devoid of genuine interest it felt like a physical blow. It was a stark contrast to the lavish praise he'd heaped on Ethan just weeks before, when Ethan had successfully landed a new construction contract for a suburban shopping mall. "That's my boy." Dad had boomed over Sunday dinner. "Bringing in the business. That's what builds an empire." By the time I was 30, I was leading the AI development department at Innovatech, spearheading the ambitious Orion initiative, a project poised to revolutionize data processing. My team respected me, my contributions were valued, and my career was soaring. But at every Thanksgiving dinner, every Christmas gathering, every obligatory family holiday back in Bridgeport, when Dad, my father, William Hayes, raised his glass for the customary toast, his words were always the same. "To Ethan and Noah," he'd declare, his voice resonant with pride, beaming at my brothers. "To their hard work, their dedication to Hayes and Sons construction. They're the backbone of this family, the future of our legacy." He'd lift his glass, and everyone would murmur their assent. My name, my achievements, my entire world at Innovatech, it was as if they didn't exist, lost in the long shadow cast by the towering edifice of his construction empire and his unwavering belief in his sons. The silence surrounding my life was deafening. So, when the crisp, cream-colored invitation to Dad's retirement gala arrived at my San Francisco apartment, I stared at it for a long time. It was a heavy, embossed card announcing a black-tie affair at the Grand Astoria Hotel in Bridgeport, promising speeches, awards, and, no doubt, a meticulously curated slideshow celebrating William Hayes' monumental journey as the founder and CEO of Hayes and Sons Construction. My first instinct, a powerful, self-preservationist urge, was to toss it straight into the recycling bin. I almost didn't go. God, I almost didn't. The thought of enduring another evening of being a footnote in my own family's narrative, of watching Ethan and Noah lauded while I faded into the wallpaper, was physically nauseating. Almost. But something in me, a stubborn, defiant flicker I hadn't quite managed to extinguish, insisted I needed to be there. Not for him, not to applaud his carefully constructed legacy. For me, for the part of me that still needed to witness the end of this chapter, to see it through, perhaps to finally close a door that had been left painfully ajar for far too long. That week, I flew from the vibrant tech hub of San Francisco back to the familiar, often stifling, atmosphere of Bridgeport, Connecticut. I checked into a sterile, anonymous hotel downtown, a neutral space far removed from the weighted history of the Hayes family home. In my room, and back in my study before I left, I'd continued to wrestle with that damned speech, the words feeling more like a betrayal with each recitation. I tried to rehearse something neutral, something anodyne, something that wouldn't make the already strained family dynamics even worse, something that wouldn't carve fresh wounds into old scars. Chloe's words echoed in my mind. You're just setting yourself up to be hurt again. Because what I hadn't told anyone, not even Chloe, not even the therapist I saw sporadically to unpack the complex baggage of being a Hayes, was the sheer, stupid, tenacious persistence of this tiny, fragile ember of hope I still carried deep inside me. A hope that whispered, despite all evidence to the contrary, that maybe, just maybe, this night, his grand finale, would be the night he'd finally say something different. Something that acknowledged me, Olivia, not just as the daughter who likes computers, but as a person, a professional, someone who had also, in her own way, achieved something. Something real. Instead, I had a chilling premonition that the night would end with me handing him that carefully chosen, painfully symbolic gift, the replica of the mathematics puzzle, and that stark, unsparing note, and walking away, not just from the party, but from a lifetime of futile expectation. Walking away for good. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. The speech, the gift, the decision, it was all still a maelstrom of rehearsal and raw, conflicting emotions. I still harbored in some small, deeply foolish corner of my heart the belief that if I just said the right words, wore the appropriately elegant dress, managed the perfect, non-threatening smile, I could somehow rewrite our deeply flawed family story. That I could fix what felt so irreparably broken between my father and me. But I didn't know yet what carefully chosen words he was going to utter in his own self-congratulatory speech. I couldn't anticipate exactly how deeply his predictable omissions and casual dismissals would cut this time, or, conversely, how profoundly liberating it would feel to finally let that wound bleed openly, to acknowledge the pain, and then, finally, to walk away from it all, standing tall and unbowed. The air in Bridgeport felt heavy with unspoken things. I arrived at the Grand Astoria Hotel a full 20 minutes early, not out of eagerness, but because a lifetime of managing anxiety had taught me that overcompensation was my default coping mechanism. Punctuality was a shield. The uniformed valet, all crisp efficiency, reached for my keys, and for a fleeting second, I hesitated. The sleek, black Tesla wasn't ostentatious by San Francisco tech elite standards, but here, in the context of my family and their solidly traditional construction magnate world, it practically screamed, "Look at me, the successful AI lead from Innovatech, trying too hard to prove something." A familiar wave of self-consciousness washed over me, but I pushed it down, handed over the keys with a polite nod, and walked through the ornate, revolving doors of the Astoria Hotel. The ballroom was already humming with a muted energy, half full of Bridgeport's business elite and local dignitaries, all there to pay homage to William Hayes. Round tables, draped in heavy white linen, dotted the vast expanse of the room. Enormous floral centerpieces, artful, but so tall they seemed designed to deliberately block conversation across the tables, added a touch of impersonal grandeur. Waiters, dressed in black and white, moved like silent, efficient ghosts, dispensing champagne and canapes. Behind the grand podium, a massive screen played a slideshow on a continuous loop, a visual narrative of my father's ascent. His younger, harder face filled the screen. Shaking hands with mayors and senators at groundbreaking ceremonies for Hayes and Sons construction projects, pointing decisively at blueprints on dusty construction sites, accepting civic awards, always dressed in impeccably tailored suits that mirrored the unyielding set of his jaw. It was a carefully curated montage of a man building an empire of concrete and steel. There were no candid family photos in this heroic reel, no images of scraped knees at childhood birthday parties, no awkward Christmas morning snapshots, no hint of a private life or softer emotions. Just William Hayes, the titan of industry, in a series of grayscale and muted color power poses, as if any display of genuine, unscripted feeling would somehow contaminate the carefully constructed legacy. It was all business, all achievement, all steely resolve. I stood near the grand entrance, feeling a familiar knot tighten in my stomach, my eyes scanning the opulent room for a familiar face in the sea of expensive suits and evening gowns. Across the expanse, near a table laden with what looked like awards and commendations, my mother, Eleanor, caught my eye. She offered a small, almost imperceptible wave, a quick, discreet motion, the kind someone makes when they're trying to signal support without drawing undue attention to themselves or to me. It was her signature move, that quiet, almost furtive acknowledgement. Mom always had a way of trying to support me silently, from the shadowy corners of family gatherings, her love a fragile thing, easily overshadowed by Dad's booming presence and iron will. Her expression was a familiar blend of warmth and anxiety, a silent plea for me to navigate the evening with grace, to not cause a scene. I offered a tight smile in return, a silent acknowledgement of her impossible position, caught between her husband's rigid expectations and her daughter's quiet pain. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. A smooth, familiar voice drawled from behind me. I turned to see Ethan, my eldest brother, approaching with his signature confident stride. He looked every inch the aspiring CEO of Hayes and Sons Construction, bespoke suit impeccably tailored, teeth gleaming white against a carefully maintained tan, an air of polished affability that always felt more practiced than genuine. Noah, ever his brother's shadow in social settings, followed a step behind, offering me a brief, almost cursory nod as he meticulously adjusted his already perfect tie. "Olivia," Ethan said, his voice a little too loud, pulling me into an embrace that felt less like a warm greeting and more like a strategic business maneuver, a public display of familial unity for the onlookers. His cologne was expensive and overpowering. Glad you could tear yourself away from all those complex algorithms and data streams in San Francisco. His tone held that familiar undercurrent of condescension, the subtle implication that my work was somehow frivolous or, at best, incomprehensible compared to the tangible, real-world business of construction. "Still at Innovatech, Ethan," I replied, keeping my voice even and neutral, refusing to rise to the bait. "Leading the Orion Initiative AI project, actually." I tried to inject a note of pride, of significance, into my words. "Right, right, the computer stuff." Noah chimed in, his attempt at a smile not quite reaching his eyes. He had a more grounded, less polished air than Ethan, the practical site manager to Ethan's smooth-talking executive. Dad still jokes that it's all just fancy typing and blinking lights until someone figures out how to make an AI actually pour concrete or frame a building. He chuckled, a short, dismissive sound that Ethan readily joined. I forced a smile, tight and rehearsed, a familiar mask slipping into place. "Well, our AI is currently revolutionizing global logistics and predictive analytics, so I guess we're doing something impactful," I said, my voice betraying none of the sudden weariness that settled over me. They laughed again, not with outright malice, more with a casual, unthinking dismissal that was perhaps even more cutting. It was the laughter of those who operated from a position of assumed superiority, who simply couldn't conceive of value outside their own narrow parameters. Then, just as quickly, they moved on, drawn towards a cluster of what I presumed were important H&S construction clients or local politicians, their backs already turned to me. And just like that, in the span of a 30-second interaction, I was transported back to feeling like that awkward teenager in high school, the one who didn't quite fit, the girl with the wrong kind of intelligence, the wrong kind of ambition, the one whose dreams were written in a language her family refused to learn. Invisible once more, even in a room filled with people. A waiter, impeccably dressed, glided past with a silver tray laden with flutes of champagne. I reached out and took one, the cool glass a small comfort in my suddenly clammy hand. The bubbles tickled my nose, a sharp contrast to the dull ache blooming in my chest. My gaze drifted across the opulent ballroom, eventually landing on my father, William Hayes. He stood near the head table, a commanding presence, tall and impeccably composed in a deep navy suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. He was flanked by a deferential circle of H&S construction executives and what I assumed were former colleagues from his long career, all hanging on his every word. His laugh, a familiar, booming sound that always managed to dominate any room, echoed periodically. His hand gestures were expansive, confident, the gestures of a man entirely comfortable in his power, the retired king holding one last, glorious court. I watched him for a long moment, a silent observer on the periphery, waiting with a familiar, painful throb of hope for him to look my way, to offer even a cursory nod of acknowledgement. He didn't. His eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the room, but they slid past me as if I were part of the expensive floral arrangements. But then I saw his gaze land on Ethan and Noah, who had joined another group near the bar. A broad smile spread across his face, genuine and unreserved. He strode towards them, clapping Ethan heartily on the shoulder, then slinging an arm around Noah, gesturing proudly as he clearly regaled their companions with some anecdote about his brilliant sons, the pillars of Hayes and Sons construction. The pride in his posture, in the very angle of his head, was unmistakable and agonizingly clear. He even turned to my mother, Eleanor, who was hovering nearby, and bestowed upon her a rare public kiss on the cheek, a gesture of magnanimity that made the society photographers flashbulb pop. And then, when a discreet announcement rippled through the room, the event organizer, gently requesting everyone to find their seats for the formal program to begin, Dad, my father, William Hayes, turned towards the head table without a single glance in my direction. He didn't notice me still standing awkwardly at the edge of the vast room, a solitary figure clutching a champagne flute, wrestling with the overwhelming urge to simply turn and flee. Quietly, I was deciding whether I should have listened to Chloe, whether I should have stayed in San Francisco, whether coming here at all had been a colossal mistake. Just as I took a half step towards the exit, resolving to make a quiet escape before the speeches began, I felt a gentle but firm tug on my arm. I turned, startled. Olivia. My mother's voice was soft, almost a whisper, but laced with an uncharacteristic firmness, her eyes pleading. Please don't go. Her hand on my arm was trembling slightly. He'll say something tonight, I'm sure of it. He has to. A fragile hope illuminated her face, a hope I knew was more for my sake than her own. Tonight is about all of us, Olivia. The whole family. Oh, Mom. I wanted so desperately to believe her. I wanted to believe that tonight, finally, something would shift. That maybe, just for once, in this grand farewell to his career, he'd look out at the assembled crowd and recognize more than just his two sons and their predestined roles in Hayes and Sons construction. That maybe, after all these years, after all my efforts and achievements in a world so different from his own, he'd actually say my name. Olivia Hayes, lead of the Orion Initiative at Innovatech, with a flicker of genuine pride. The thought sent a foolish, treacherous wave of warmth through me. But then, inevitably, the grand ballroom lights dimmed, casting the room in a dramatic, expectant twilight. A hush fell over the chattering crowd. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor with a booming, overly enthusiastic voice, took to the brightly lit stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues," he began, his smile wide and gleaming. "Tonight we gather to celebrate a true titan of industry, a visionary leader, a man who literally built a significant part of our city, a man who dedicated his entire life to excellence in construction and development, the founder and driving force behind the legendary Hayes and Sons construction." He paused for effect, his voice dropping to a reverent tone. "Please put your hands together and give a thunderous welcome to the one, the only Mr. William Hayes." Thunderous applause erupted, a wave of sound washing over the room. My father, William Hayes, walked onto the stage with the confident air of a seasoned performer, waving magnanimously to the cheering crowd like a senator acknowledging his adoring constituents. He paused at the podium, basking in the spotlight, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips, before he finally leaned into the microphone. Thank you all so much," he began, his voice amplified by the sound system, filling every corner of the vast room. It was a voice I knew so well, a voice that could command boardrooms and construction sites with equal authority. This has been the journey of a lifetime," he continued, a carefully calibrated note of emotion in his tone. "And I certainly wouldn't be standing here tonight, reflecting on all these years, without the unwavering support of my incredible family." My heart gave a small, involuntary leap. I sat up straighter in my chair, my breath catching in my throat. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe tonight. He smiled, a broad, paternal smile directed at the section where our family table was located. "My sons, Ethan and Noah," he declared, his voice swelling with unmistakable pride, "have always made me immensely proud." He gestured towards them, and a spotlight briefly illuminated their gratified faces. Both of them chose to follow in my footsteps, to dedicate themselves to the hard work and tangible results of building something lasting with Hayes and Sons construction. Both chose to lead, to innovate, to build upon the foundations I laid. Everything I've achieved, every success Hayes and Sons has enjoyed, I see reflected and amplified in their commitment. They are the future of this company, my true legacy. They represent the Hayes name with unwavering strength, integrity, and a profound understanding of what it takes to succeed in the real world. Another wave of applause, even more enthusiastic this time. People at nearby tables actually stood, turning to clap in Ethan and Noah's direction. I felt Mom stiffen beside me. Then, Dad's tone shifted, becoming softer almost, pitying or perhaps just dismissive, as if addressing a minor, slightly awkward footnote. "Of course," he continued, a slight, almost imperceptible shrug in his voice, "not every child is cut out for the demanding world of construction and development, and that's perfectly all right. Not everyone is cut from the same sturdy cloth, after all." He paused, and a small, indulgent chuckle rippled through some sections of the audience. "My daughter, Olivia," he said, and my name, when it finally came, felt like an afterthought, a casual, almost parenthetical insertion. She's involved in some sort of complex computer work over in San Francisco. With Innovatech Solutions, I believe it is." He glanced down at his notes as if to confirm the name of my globally recognized company. "Apparently, she's doing quite well in her, chosen field. It's a different path, of course, a very modern pursuit. And it's wonderful to see women making their mark in various fields these days, even the more abstract ones." He didn't say my name again. He didn't mention the Orion Initiative, my leadership role, or any specific achievement. It was a vague, patronizing nod to my computer work, framed as a quaint, modern diversion, worlds away from the real achievements of his sons. He didn't say "some wander," but the implication was crystal clear, hanging heavy and suffocating in the air. My carefully constructed world of AI, data science, and innovation was reduced to some sort of complex computer work. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold wave washing over me, leaving me numb and exposed. The words, so casually delivered, landed with the brutal, echoing finality that only profound public humiliation can truly deliver. My daughter, well, she fiddles with computers, but my sons, they are my legacy. That's what everyone in that room heard, or at least, that's what the carefully chosen emphasis implied. And then, the worst part, the light, polite, but undeniably sharp ripples of laughter that spread through certain sections of the audience. It wasn't overtly cruel laughter, more like the condescending amusement one might show towards a child's eccentric hobby. But it cut deeper, far deeper, than any deliberate insult or stony silence ever could. It was the laughter of dismissal. It was the sound of my life's work being trivialized on a grand stage. A profound, icy calm settled over me, displacing the churning sea of hurt and humiliation. I stood up. My movement was slow, deliberate, but in the suddenly hushed ballroom, it felt as conspicuous as a spotlight. Every eye, hundreds of them, turned towards me, a sea of curious, startled, and vaguely scandalized faces. I could feel Mom's hand instinctively reach for my arm, a silent plea to sit down, to not make a scene, but I gently disengaged. I walked, not towards the exit, but slowly, measuredly, towards the brightly lit stage, towards my father, William Hayes, who was still basking in the afterglow of his self-congratulatory speech, a look of mild surprise now dawning on his face. In my hands, I carried the gift I had so meticulously prepared, the replica of that intricate mathematics puzzle from my childhood, and the small, stark white card nestled beside it. It wasn't wrapped in cheerful paper or adorned with a festive ribbon. Its impact lay in its raw, unshielded symbolism. As I approached the edge of the stage, a flicker of movement on the giant screen behind Dad caught my eye and his. For a fleeting, almost subliminal moment, the grand montage of Hayes and Sons' construction triumphs was replaced by a grainy, faded photograph. A much younger version of Dad, looking somewhat bored and impatient, and a small, earnest girl with dark pigtails, me, her face alight with concentration, a complex puzzle spread between us on a table. It was an image I had scanned and given to the AV technician earlier with a vague instruction about family memories, a tiny, almost invisible act of rebellion I hadn't been sure would even work. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he registered the image, his practiced smile faltering for a split second before the slideshow quickly reverted to a picture of him cutting his ceremonial ribbon. The air crackled with unspoken tension. My voice, when I finally spoke, was surprisingly steady, clear, and devoid of any tremor. It carried across the silent room. I held out the unwrapped puzzle and the card. "Congratulations on your retirement, Dad," I said, my tone even, almost conversational, yet piercingly direct. He reached for it, his expression now a mixture of confusion and dawning irritation. "I brought you something to mark the occasion." His fingers brushed mine as he took the items. I watched his eyes flick down to the elegant script on the card. This was the only time our minds ever truly met. "I wonder, do you even remember the thrill of solving it, Dad? Or was I just another calculation you couldn't quite place? From your biggest miscalculation." I saw the exact moment the words registered, the slight tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something unreadable anger, shock, in his eyes. "Perhaps now," I continued, my voice still calm, but with an edge as sharp as a shard of glass, "you'll finally have more time for calculations." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Mom's face was ashen. Ethan and Noah looked utterly stunned. And then I turned my back on him, on the shocked faces, on the entire glittering edifice of his meticulously crafted legacy. My heels clicked with a steady, rhythmic cadence on the polished marble floor of the Grand Astoria Hotel ballroom as I walked, not ran, towards the exit. Not a single part of me was rushing or cowering or shrinking. I felt an odd sense of lightness, as if a tremendous, invisible weight had just been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't look back. Not even once. I didn't drive away from the Grand Astoria Hotel immediately after walking out of that suffocating ballroom. My legs, surprisingly steady during my defiant exit, now felt like they might give way. Instead, I found my Tesla in a quiet, dimly lit corner of the hotel's underground parking garage, slipped into the driver's seat, and just sat there, the engine off, the silence of the concrete tomb pressing in around me. My hands were frozen on the steering wheel, knuckles white. My chest felt tight, constricted, but it wasn't the frantic fluttering of panic, not anymore. What I felt was something far slower, colder, more profound. It was the chilling clarity of standing exposed in the heart of a blizzard you knew had been gathering on the horizon for years. A storm you had finally, irrevocably, decided to walk directly into. The air in the car was still and heavy. On the passenger seat, my small evening clutch, a sleek designer piece Chloe had insisted I buy, began to buzz insistently. A text message illuminated the screen. Mom. Of course. Then another. Chloe Miller, my brilliant, no-nonsense best friend from our Stanford days, the one who had practically begged me, her voice laced with exasperated affection, not to attend this disastrous retirement party in the first place. Liv, don't do it to yourself, she'd warned just days ago. He's not going to change. You'll just end up heartbroken again. How right she had been. And then, a third message flashed, this one catching me slightly off guard. Olivia, what the hell was that all about? What was that puzzle thing you gave Dad? That one was from Noah. Not Ethan, interestingly. Noah, the quieter, perhaps more observant of my two brothers. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't even unlock my phone to open the messages, to read the frantic words I knew were already pouring in. Because I already knew with a bone-deep certainty that the real storm, the one I had just ignited, was currently raging inside that opulent ballroom. The moment was unfolding back there, amidst the crystal chandeliers and the stunned silence, the moment I had walked out of, yet one I knew I still hadn't entirely emotionally left behind. The ripples of my actions were spreading, and I could almost feel the vibrations even here in the cold, impersonal concrete of the parking garage. My father, William Hayes, I knew, wouldn't have immediately processed the full impact of the puzzle and the note right there on stage. Not in front of hundreds of his esteemed guests and colleagues. He was far too composed for that, too meticulously concerned with maintaining his public image, his carefully constructed facade of unflappable authority. He would have quickly, almost dismissively set them aside, perhaps with a tight, forced smile, and attempted to regain control of the derailed ceremony. But later, when the applause had faded and the guests had departed, when he was alone with the echoes of the disastrous evening, then the words on that small white card, the stark symbolism of that intricate mathematical puzzle would begin to burrow under his skin. His curiosity, or more likely, his indignation and his deep-seated need to understand and control every variable would eventually win out. If there's one thing William Hayes detested more than perceived weakness or emotional displays, it was being outmaneuvered. Being presented with a problem he couldn't immediately solve or dismiss, being made to feel like he wasn't in absolute control. And I had just handed him an equation he hadn't anticipated. The puzzle itself was a replica of one from my childhood. A notoriously difficult one I'd found in an old advanced mathematics journal when I was about 10. I remembered dragging it to his den, my heart thumping with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, hoping, praying, for a sliver of shared intellectual engagement. He'd been engrossed in blueprints for some new Hayes & Sons construction project, the air thick with the smell of coffee and ambition. He hadn't wanted to be bothered, his impatience a palpable force field around him. "What is it, Olivia?" He'd sighed, barely glancing up. "Can't you see I'm busy with real work?" But I had persisted, spreading the complex diagrams on a small corner of his massive mahogany desk, my small voice explaining the challenge. I remembered how he'd stared at it, a frown etching deeper lines into his forehead, not with the thrill of a challenge, but with a kind of bewildered irritation. He'd made a cursory attempt, then pushed it away. Too complicated. A waste of time. Olivia. Numbers games. But I hadn't given up. I'd worked on it for days, my young mind buzzing, and when I finally solved it, the rush of triumph was exhilarating. I tried to show him, to share that spark, but he'd already forgotten, already moved on. "That's nice, dear," he'd said, his attention already back on his real work. That fleeting moment, however, the one where he'd briefly, grudgingly, engaged with something purely intellectual, had lodged in my memory as the closest we'd ever come to a meeting of minds, however illusory. The note I'd written, the one he was now undoubtedly rereading with growing fury, laid it bare. This was the only time our minds ever truly met. I wonder, do you even remember the thrill of solving it, Dad? Or was I just another calculation you couldn't quite place? From your biggest miscalculation. I'd chosen the word miscalculation deliberately. It was a jab at his business-oriented mind, a suggestion that I, his academically gifted, data-driven daughter, was a variable he had fundamentally misunderstood, undervalued, and ultimately dismissed. He'd look at that puzzle, a symbol of the intellectual world he'd always disdained in me, and he'd see the words on that card. He'd see himself, not as the lauded titan of industry from his carefully polished legacy reel, but perhaps, just perhaps, as a father who had profoundly miscalculated the worth of his own child. A father who had failed to see the unique brilliance right in front of him because it didn't fit his pre-approved blueprint for success. The version of him who could have nurtured that spark, who could have been a different kind of father, was a ghost I had long since stopped chasing. But tonight, I had forced him to at least acknowledge its existence. Back in the cold silence of the Tesla, I still didn't cry. A part of me, the part conditioned by years of disappointment, thought the tears would finally come, a torrential, cathartic release. But they didn't. Instead, what settled over me was a strange, almost unnerving kind of quiet. A profound stillness in the eye of the hurricane I had just unleashed. It's a difficult sensation to articulate. It's that hollow, echoing peace that descends when you finally, definitively, stop attempting to scale an insurmountable, illusory mountain. When you realize with absolute, chilling certainty that the magnificent peak you've been striving towards your entire life, the one promising acceptance and validation, was never anything more than a beautifully painted backdrop of breathtaking from a distance, but utterly empty and hollow up close. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of decades, I finally pulled out my phone. Not to respond to the barrage of messages from Mom or Noah, not yet. My fingers, almost of their own accord, navigated to the familiar icon of a notorious tech industry gossip site, TechLeak. My stomach churned with a mixture of dread and grim anticipation. Sure enough, it was already there. A hastily posted article, its headline blazing across my screen in sensationalist font. Exclusive, Innovatech Solutions AI lead, Olivia Hayes, delivers shocking message at father's retirement gala. Someone, undoubtedly a guest with a smartphone and a taste for drama, had already leaked the story. There was even a short, slightly blurry video clip, likely filmed from a distant table. You couldn't hear my words perfectly. The audio was muffled by the shocked silence of the room, but you could clearly see the sequence of events. My calm, deliberate walk to the stage, the way I handed Dad the unconcealed puzzle and the white card, his stunned expression, and then my measured, unwavering departure. The accompanying text, however, breathlessly recounted my parting words, including the sting of your biggest miscalculation and the final, pointed calculations remark. The comments section below the article was already exploding. They were a chaotic mix, as expected. Some dismissed it as a cringy family drama, speculating it was staged for attention, a ludicrous thought given my intensely private nature. Others, particularly those identifying as women in tech, applauded what they called a baller power move against a dinosaur dad. A vocal few, predictably, criticized me for disrespecting her father and ruining his special night. But what truly gripped me, what made me pause and read carefully, were the private messages, the DMs that were already starting to trickle in from anonymous accounts, from strangers who felt a shocking kinship. Olivia, I don't know you, but I wish I had your courage. My father sounds exactly like yours. That line about being his biggest miscalculation. Damn, that hit so incredibly hard. Thank you for saying out loud what so many of us feel. As a woman in STEM with a traditional family, your story is my story. Keep standing tall. I didn't respond to any of them, not yet. The rawness of it all was still too much. But I read every single word, a strange mixture of pain and an unfamiliar sense of connection unfurling within me. Because for the very first time in my entire life, it felt like someone, somewhere, was actually listening. Someone was seeing me, Olivia Hayes, not just as a disregarded daughter, a footnote in William Hayes' grand narrative of success, but as the struggling, defiant, and now undeniably visible author of my own unfolding story. And somewhere back in that now emptied, silent ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel, or perhaps in the cold formality of his Bridgeport mansion, William Hayes, my father, was alone with a child's mathematical puzzle and a single, stark white card. He was holding the tangible evidence of a daughter he had systematically undervalued, the living embodiment of his most profound, and until now, unacknowledged miscalculation. The image of him, confronted by a truth he could no longer easily dismiss or rewrite, was a strangely satisfying, albeit painful one. The first insistent ring of my phone sliced through the heavy silence of the car just before midnight. I glanced at the caller ID, a blocked number. Likely Dad, testing the waters. I let it ring until it fell silent. Then the second call came, this time from my Ethan. I ignored that too. Then the third, Noah. Ignored. My phone became a relentless beacon of familial disapproval, lighting up with a depressing regularity. By the time it blazed to life for what must have been the sixth or seventh time, displaying "Mom" on the screen, a wave of weary resignation washed over me. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the green "Accept" icon, a battle raging within me. Part of me wanted to hurl the phone into the darkest corner of the garage. Another, smaller part, the part that still yearned for some semblance of maternal connection, however flawed, compelled me to answer. I finally picked up. Olivia, Mom's voice, crackled through the speaker, brittle with distress, tight and urgent. Olivia, thank God. What on earth was that stunt you pulled? What was that? That puzzle thing you gave your father? What did that awful note say? I didn't answer right away. I could hear a cacophony of muffled sounds in the background. Hurried, agitated footsteps, the clink of glass, and unmistakably, my father's voice, William Hayes' voice, low, guttural, and vibrating with barely suppressed fury. It cut through the background noise like a freshly sharpened blade. He was clearly pacing, ranting, the king dethroned and enraged in his own castle. You already know what it was about, Mom, I said quietly, my own voice surprisingly calm against the storm brewing on her end. It was about the only time I ever truly believed he saw my mind, my intellect, not just a daughter who didn't fit his mold, a problem he couldn't solve. Silence stretched between us, taut and heavy, punctuated only by Dad's distant, angry rumbling. Then, Mom's voice, when it came, was sharp with accusation. You humiliated him, Olivia. In front of all those people. His colleagues, his friends, our friends. How could you do something so cruel, so public? A bitter, humorless laugh almost escaped me. I swallowed it down. No, Mom, I corrected, my voice hardening despite myself. He's been humiliating me quietly, systematically, for 34 years. This was just the first time the humiliation wasn't solely mine to bear in private. Another long, strained silence. I could almost picture her, wringing her hands, her face etched with worry and a lifetime of practiced deference to her husband. Finally, she whispered, her voice trembling. "He didn't mean to hurt you like this, Olivia. You have to believe that. He just, he doesn't know how to show things, how to appreciate things that are different from what he knows. He was raised to believe that emotions are a weakness, Olivia, that a man's worth is in his business, his sons." Her voice trailed off, thick with unshed tears and a familiar helplessness. "You know, he comes from a different generation, a different way of thinking. Even I, with my own studies, I." She stopped, as if a painful memory had surfaced. Her own academic achievements, perhaps, willingly or unwillingly shelved for marriage and motherhood. "I wasn't asking for tears, Mom," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the anger that roiled beneath the surface. "I wasn't asking for a parade or a standing ovation. All I ever wanted was a little acknowledgement. Just a sign that he saw me, that my achievements mattered, even if they weren't made of bricks and steel." And after tonight, I concluded, a profound sense of finality settling over me, I'm officially done asking. I ended the call before she could reply, before she could launch into another round of excuses for him, or perhaps a faltering, half-hearted apology on his behalf. The truth was, I didn't trust what would come next. Her loyalty, I knew, would ultimately lie with him, as it always had. The familiar ache of that realization was just another layer of ice forming around my heart. The next morning, the harsh light of a new day felt intrusive, unwelcome. I turned off my phone, unable to face another barrage of calls or texts, and spent hours walking aimlessly through the unfamiliar streets of downtown Bridgeport. The city was waking up around me, people hurrying to work with coffee cups in hand, joggers with headphones disappearing around corners, delivery trucks rumbling past. It felt utterly surreal, this normal, bustling world continuing on its axis while the emotional equivalent of a carefully planted demolition charge had just detonated inside my life, leveling years of carefully constructed defenses. By noon, the need to reconnect to at least gauge the extent of the fallout gnawed at me. I found a quiet bench in a small city park, took a deep breath, and turned my phone back on. It immediately sprang to life, vibrating angrily in my hand. 38 unread messages, a dozen missed calls, a grim tally of last night's carnage. My thumb hovered over the notifications. I skipped the lengthy, undoubtedly self-righteous messages from Ethan. I could already imagine their content. Outrage, accusations of selfishness, a lecture on family loyalty and respecting Dad. I also bypassed the shorter, probably more conflicted, but ultimately loyal to Dad texts from Noah. I already knew what they'd say, what they had to say, as sons of William Hayes, as heirs to Hayes and Sons Construction. They would defend him, accuse me of a calculated, cruel ambush, of irrevocably ruining his special night. They would call me dramatic, ungrateful, cold, and probably a host of other unflattering adjectives. But one message, nestled amongst the others, made my breath catch in my throat. It was from an unsaved number, but I knew with a chilling certainty who it was from. Dad. Just two stark, uncompromising words. We need. Then, second message immediately followed, as if an afterthought, or perhaps a correction from his archaic phone. To talk. We need to talk. Not, I'm sorry. Not, are you okay? Not even, how dare you? Just those 5 syllables, devoid of any discernible emotion, yet laden with an undeniable weight of command. It wasn't an invitation. It felt like a summons. The kind a king issues to a rebellious subject. I stared at the words on the small screen for a long, long time, the everyday sounds of Bridgeport fading into a distant hum. There was no overt anger in those 2 short words, no hint of apology or conciliation either. Just the cold, hard demand for an audience. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Later that evening, despite every instinct screaming at me to book the first flight back to San Francisco, I found myself driving towards Hemlock Lane, towards my childhood home. It wasn't out of any sense of obligation. Not anymore. That cord had been decisively severed. It was driven by something far more complex and harder to define. A reluctant, grim curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe, just maybe, a deeply buried, almost perverse need for some kind of closure. To witness the final act of this family drama I had unwittingly scripted. The Hayes house, a stately New England colonial my father had meticulously maintained as a testament to his success, looked exactly the same as it always had. Red brick facade, perfectly manicured lawn, even in the fading light, the traditional brass lantern on the porch always left illuminated. A beacon of unchanging order in a world that had, for me at least, irrevocably shifted on its axis. It was as if nothing ever truly changed here, even when everything had. I let myself in with the old, familiar key that I probably should have discarded years ago. The heavy oak door creaked open, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint, nostalgic scent of Mom's lemon polish mingled with the fainter, sharper aroma of old books and something else. Something that was uniquely Dad. Perhaps the lingering scent of his expensive aftershave or the crispness of architectural blueprints. The wave of unwelcome memories washed over me. I found him in the den, his inner sanctum, the room where so many of my childhood hopes had gone to die. He was alone, a solitary, brooding figure, slumped in his enormous leather armchair, the one that always seemed to swallow him whole, yet also magnify his authority. The room was dimly lit, only a single lamp casting long, ominous shadows on the wood, paneled walls lined with his business accolades and framed photos of Hayes and Sons construction projects. In his hands, he wasn't holding a comforting book or a newspaper. He was holding the replica of the mathematics puzzle I had given him, turning it over and over. The small white note lay on the heavy mahogany coffee table beside him, stark against the dark wood. He didn't look up when I entered, though he must have heard the creak of the floorboards, the soft click of the door. His silence was a palpable entity in the room, heavy and suffocating. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably no more than a full, agonizing minute, we both sat enveloped in that thick, charged silence. The unspoken words, the years of resentment and misunderstanding, hanging heavy between us like a physical weight. The only sound was the almost imperceptible whir of the grandfather clock in the hall, ticking away the seconds of the standoff. Then his voice, gravelly and low, finally broke the oppressive silence. Without looking at me, his gaze still fixed on the intricate puzzle in his large hands, he said, "I don't remember that specific damned puzzle." His words were flat, dismissive. "Of course you don't, Dad," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady, a chilling echo of my calm at the party. It was a rather complex calculation, after all. It was important to me. That made him flinch, a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening around his jaw, but it was there. He finally set the puzzle down on the coffee table with a thud, next to the stark white note. His eyes, when they eventually lifted to meet mine, were shadowed, unreadable. "You actually think I never cared?" he asked, his voice rough with something that might have been indignation or perhaps a dawning, uncomfortable self-awareness. "About you? About your computer things?" The way he said computer things still dripped with a faint, ingrained disdain. "I don't think it, Dad," I stated, meeting his gaze directly. "I lived it. For 34 years. You valued Hayes and Sons construction above all else. You valued Ethan and Noah, your sons, your successors. My world, my work at Innovatech, the Orion Initiative. It was always just an incomprehensible abstraction to you, wasn't it? Something not quite real because you couldn't touch it, couldn't measure its profit margins in concrete and steel." He looked away, a muscle working in his cheek. "I pushed you," he said quietly, his voice defensive, Because I saw something in you, Olivia. Something. Sharp. Unrelenting. Something that wasn't easy. No, Dad, I corrected, my voice firm, but weary. You didn't push me to be better. You pushed me away. You pushed me away because I didn't fit your meticulously drawn blueprint for a daughter. Because my passions didn't align with the legacy of Hayes and Sons. There's a profound, painful difference. Finally, he looked directly at me again, his eyes holding a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Frustration? Regret? I admit, I didn't know how to handle you, he conceded, the words sounding like they were physically painful for him to utter. You weren't like your brothers, Ethan and Noah. They understood the business, the value of hard work. You can see. You didn't just seek approval for your different path. You challenged my values, my world, everything I'd built. You constantly challenged me. I folded my arms across my chest, a defensive posture I hadn't even realized I'd adopted. And that innate curiosity, that drive to question, to excel in a field you didn't understand or respect, did that make me less worthy of your pride, Dad? Less worthy than Ethan or Noah? He hesitated, his gaze dropping back to the puzzle on the table, as if the answer was too complicated, too damning to articulate out loud. You always reminded me of your grandfather, my own father, he said finally, his voice distant, almost melancholic. He was an academic, always with his head in books, questioning the practical world. He never truly approved of me either, of my choice to go into construction instead of pursuing a more intellectual path. He thought building things with my hands was beneath him. And there it was. The tangled, bitter lineage of resentment and misunderstanding passed down from father to son, and now, unwittingly, from father to daughter. An heirloom no one wanted, but everyone seemed to inherit. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over me, so potent it nearly buckled my knees. I sank onto the edge of the stiff, antique sofa, the one Mom always covered in plastic for special occasions. So, I've spent my entire life, I said, the words heavy with a dawning, painful understanding, being indirectly punished for your unresolved issues with your own father? For not being a son? For choosing a path of intellectual pursuit that you equated with his disapproval? You were never a failure, Olivia, he said, his voice surprisingly softer now, though still gruff. He finally looked at me, truly looked, and for the first time, I saw not just the authoritarian patriarch, but a glimpse of a tired, conflicted old man. Your mind. It was always incredibly sharp. Too sharp sometimes. I genuinely didn't know how to raise a daughter like you. I didn't know how to build a bridge to your world of algorithms and data. He used his own construction metaphor, and the irony wasn't lost on me. You didn't try to build a bridge, Dad, I replied, my voice quiet but firm. You just expected me to stand on the other side of the chasm, admire your magnificent constructions from a distance, and remain silent and appreciative. You just ignored me, dismissed my world, until I finally gave up trying to be seen by you. He looked at me again then, a long, searching gaze. I saw you, Olivia, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw the articles about your successes at Innovatech. I even read about that Orion initiative you lead. I didn't know what to do with what I saw. I didn't know how to react to a daughter who consistently outsmarted me in ways I couldn't measure with a damned yardstick or a profit and loss statement. That, I realized with a sudden, startling clarity, was the closest I would ever get to an apology from William Hayes. And strangely, in that moment, it felt like enough. Not because it magically erased 34 years of neglect and misunderstanding. It didn't. It couldn't. The wounds were too deep, the patterns too ingrained. But because I finally, irrevocably understood. I had spent my entire life trying to earn something, approval, recognition, love from a man who was fundamentally unequipped to give it in the way I needed it. And that wasn't my failure. It never had been. It was, and always would be his limitation, his loss. The realization was a cold, hard, but ultimately liberating truth. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks in which I flew back to the vibrant, fog-kissed energy of San Francisco, back to my apartment overlooking the bay, back to the demanding embrace of the Orion Initiative at Innovatech. 2 weeks of relative silence from Bridgeport, a silence that was, for once, almost peaceful. It was only then, amidst the familiar hum of my own life, the life I had painstakingly built for myself, that I fully, truly realized the monumental weight I'd been carrying for as long as I could remember was gone. Not just lessened, not temporarily lifted by a fleeting moment of defiance, but completely, utterly gone. It hadn't departed with a dramatic, Hollywood-esque scream or some grand, tearful confrontation that ended in hugs and understanding. No, it had slipped away quietly, almost stealthily, like a stubborn, unwelcome tenant who'd been squatting in the shadowed corners of my soul for decades and had finally, without fanfare, packed up their meager belongings in the dead of night and vanished. The relentless, gnawing need for Dad's approval. The persistent, dull ache for his acknowledgement. The deeply ingrained, childish fantasy that one day, William Hayes would look at me, his academically brilliant, successful data scientist daughter, and finally, unequivocally, say the words I had craved for a lifetime. "Olivia, you are enough. I am proud of you." He wouldn't. I knew that now with a certainty that was as absolute as a mathematical proof. He simply didn't have it in him. His own history, his own limitations, his own deeply ingrained biases had made that an impossibility. And somehow, that stark, unvarnished truth no longer had the power to crush me. It didn't shatter my world or send me spiraling into despair. Instead, in a way I could never have anticipated, it freed me. The chains of expectation, so heavy for so long, had simply dissolved. I had already flown back to San Francisco, that Sunday morning flight 2 weeks prior still vivid in my memory. The plane had coasted over the sprawling cityscape, the iconic Golden Gate Bridge emerging from the morning fog. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I didn't feel like I was escaping something, running from the oppressive weight of Bridgeport and the Hayes family legacy. I was simply going home, back to my life, the one I had meticulously, fiercely built with my own 2 hands, my own intellect, my own relentless drive. A life forged without shortcuts, without the cushion of a family name like Hayes and Sons Construction opening doors, relying solely on sheer hard work. Countless long hours fueled by coffee and ambition, and an unshakable, deeply personal belief that I could, and would, turn the persistent pain of my upbringing into a powerful, undeniable propulsion. Innovatech Solutions welcomed me back as if I hadn't just publicly detonated several decades of carefully suppressed personal history at a society event on the East Coast. The buzz about the TechLeak article had been a brief flurry, but in the fast-paced, results-driven world of Silicon Valley, old news faded quickly. My team, my colleagues, they valued me for my expertise, my leadership on the Orion Initiative, not my family drama. The entire AI department was deep in preparation for a critical phase of the Orion Initiative, our groundbreaking AI project designed to revolutionize predictive analytics on an unprecedented scale. I was overseeing the complex risk mitigation strategies and intricate systems analysis, and though the work was incredibly intense, demanding every ounce of my focus, it felt profoundly grounding. Here, in the world of logic, data, and innovation, I was competent, respected, and in control. Here, my calculations mattered. One afternoon, about 10 days after my return from Bridgeport, my division head, a sharp, pragmatic woman named Sarah Chen, stopped by my glass-walled office. "Olivia, good to see you back in the thick of it," she said with a warm smile. "You're still on board for the keynote at the Women in Tech conference next month in the city, right?" I blinked, momentarily pulled from a complex algorithm I had been wrestling with. The WIT conference. It was a huge honor. I'd almost forgotten in the emotional whirlwind of the past few weeks. Sarah nodded, sensing my momentary lapse. You're one of the most prominent female AI leads from Innovatech and, frankly, from the Bay Area to be invited as a keynote speaker in years. She paused, her expression softening slightly. And given what many of us admire about your journey, your story could mean a tremendous amount to the younger women, the aspiring engineers and data scientists in that audience. I knew exactly what she meant by your journey and your story. She wasn't just referring to my academic credentials from Stanford or my technical achievements with the Orion Initiative. She was alluding, albeit delicately, to the widely understood, if not always publicly discussed, reality of my background. The fact that I hadn't emerged from one of the typical Silicon Valley dynasties, that I had had to navigate the fiercely competitive, often male-dominated tech spaces without a powerful family figure championing me from the wings. That my success was a testament to succeeding despite, not because of, the family I came from. A small, determined smile touched my lips. "I'm in, Sarah," I said, my voice clear and firm. Absolutely. I wouldn't miss it. There were things I needed to say, a story I was finally ready to tell. That night, I sat out on the small balcony of my San Francisco apartment, the cool Pacific breeze ruffling my hair, the glittering expanse of city lights stretching out before me like a carpet of fallen stars. I opened my laptop, a blank document glowing on the screen. The first line of my keynote speech for the Women in Tech conference didn't come instantly, not this time. It needed to be more than just a clever soundbite. It needed to be true, deeply true. After a few moments of quiet contemplation, watching the distant headlights weave their patterns on the Bay Bridge, the words began to flow. They say data is the new oil, but sometimes the most powerful fuel for your own Orion initiative, for your own ambitious project of self, isn't an external resource. It's the internal courage to uninstall the outdated operating system of other people's expectations. I wrote for hours, not about abstract theories of AI or the technical intricacies of the Orion Initiative, but about the raw, unfiltered truth of my own journey. I told the truth about growing up in a household where being a daughter, particularly one with a passion for mathematics and programming, meant being perpetually doubted, my ambitions subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, dismissed as impractical or not for girls. I wrote about how brilliance, passion, and hard-won expertise can be systematically ignored, rendered almost invisible, if they don't conform to a pre-approved family narrative, if they don't carry the right surname into the right kind of family business like Hayes and Sons Construction. I described, with a painful honesty that still made my chest ache, how deeply agonizing it is to feel unseen, unheard, and undervalued within your own family by the very people whose love and approval you instinctively crave. And then I wrote about the profound, almost shocking power that comes when you finally stop waiting for them to see you, when you stop auditioning for a role you were never meant to play, and instead turn inwards and begin the crucial work of validating your own damn self. I decided to end my speech with the kind of direct, unequivocal message I desperately wish anyone, had given me when I was a confused 16-year-old or an ambitious 22-year-old Stanford graduate, or even a driven, quietly struggling 30-year-old professional. You are not obligated to spend your life proving your worth to people who consistently refuse to see it, to acknowledge it, to celebrate it. Their inability to recognize your value is a reflection of their limitations, not yours. Some legacies, some inherited expectations are not just worth questioning. They are worth decisively, courageously breaking. And sometimes, the most revolutionary, self-affirming act you can undertake is to walk away, not in bitterness or anger, though those feelings may be valid temporary companions, but in profound, unshakable clarity about who you are and what you deserve. The video of that WIT conference speech, I would later learn, would indeed gain considerable traction online. shared widely by women and allies in tech communities across the globe. But as I typed those final words, the city lights blurring slightly through unshed tears, that future virality wasn't the point. The point was, every single word I wrote that night pulsed with the undeniable, hard-won truth of my own lived experience. I meant every syllable. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was a story that needed to be told. In the weeks that followed my return to San Francisco and that raw, cathartic evening of writing, the silence from my brothers, Ethan and Noah, was absolute. They didn't reach out, not after the explosive scene at Dad's retirement party, not after the Tech Leak article, not after my pointed conversation with Dad in the den. And you know what? That was surprisingly okay. A quiet sense of acceptance had settled over me regarding their role, or lack thereof, in my life. I had finally, truly, stopped chasing approval or understanding from people who, for whatever reason, only ever seemed to see me as an inconvenient anomaly, a problem to be managed or, preferably, ignored. My mother, Eleanor, on the other hand, did call a few times. Our conversations were initially cautious, fragile things, like two people tiptoeing across a newly frozen pond, terrified the ice might crack beneath them. We spoke of trivialities, mostly the weather in San Francisco, her garden in Bridgeport, a new recipe she'd tried. The elephant in the room, the seismic shift in our family dynamics, remained unaddressed for a while. But slowly, tentatively, the words between us began to thaw, the rigid politeness giving way to something more genuine, more vulnerable. During one call, late on a Tuesday evening, her voice softer than usual, she said, "Olivia, dear, I've been doing a lot of thinking." A pause, heavy with unspoken things. "I should have done more for you over the years," she confessed, her voice thick with a regret that felt decades old. "I should have stepped in more forcefully. With your father. With William. When he dismissed your incredible talent for mathematics, your passion for computers. When he made you feel like your dreams were less important than Ethan's or Noah's because they weren't tied to Hayes and Sons construction." Her voice broke slightly. "I saw it. I saw how much it hurt you. And I was too afraid of his anger, too conditioned to keep the peace, to truly fight for you the way a mother should." "I know, Mom," I replied gently, a lump forming in my own throat. The admission, so long in coming, was both painful and strangely healing to hear. "I know it wasn't easy for you, caught in the middle like that. But I also know," I added, the words heartfelt and true, "that underneath all of that, you did love me, even if you couldn't always show it, especially not in front of him." A soft sob came from her end of the line. "Oh, Olivia. Always. I always loved your bright, brilliant mind." It wasn't a full absolution, not for her, not for me. But it was a start, a crack of light in a long darkened room. Then came the most unexpected moment of all, arriving not with a dramatic flourish, but quietly, almost anticlimactically. A few days after that pivotal conversation with Mom, she called to say a small, plain envelope had arrived at the Bridgeport house, addressed to me in what was unmistakably Dad's sharp, angular handwriting. She offered to forward it, her voice hesitant, as if unsure of my reaction. I agreed, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. When it finally arrived at my San Francisco apartment, it was indeed a simple, unassuming white envelope. No return address. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. Inside, there was no photograph. Just a single, small piece of plain note paper, folded once. On it, a few terse lines were written in those familiar, sharp, measured block letters I recognized instantly as my father's, William Hayes's, distinctive script. The message was brutally, characteristically brief. That mathematics puzzle, a long pause seemed to hang in the ink after those words. It was indeed difficult. Another pause, even heavier this time. I was wrong. And then, just two more words, almost illegible, as if scrawled as an agonizing afterthought. I'm sorry. That was it. No signature. No warm closing sentiments. No elaborate explanations or excuses. Just those stark, fragmented admissions. An acknowledgement of the puzzle's difficulty. A proxy, perhaps, for acknowledging my intellect. And then, the two words I never, ever thought I would see written in his hand, directed at me. I'm sorry. I stared at that short, jagged note for a very long time, the words blurring and reforming before my eyes. A wave of complex, conflicting emotions washed over me. Surprise, a flicker of the old, familiar pain, a strange, unexpected surge of something akin to pity, perhaps. And beneath it all, a profound, weary sadness for all the wasted years. Finally, I carefully folded the note and placed it in the back of the same old wooden desk drawer where years ago I used to meticulously keep every generic, disappointingly impersonal birthday card he'd ever given me. The one signed with a brusque, "From Dad," with no personal message, no hint of affection. But the drawer, I realized with a sense of quiet revelation, wasn't filled with the ghosts of old pain and resentment anymore. It was now simply a repository of perspective, a reminder of a difficult past, yes, but also a testament to the hard-won peace of the present. Because sometimes the apology, if it comes at all, doesn't arrive in the grand, eloquent package you always fantasized about. Sometimes it's a fragmented, barely legible scrawl on a piece of cheap paper. And sometimes, often, it doesn't come until long after you've painstakingly, painfully stopped needing it to validate your own existence. That I was beginning to understand is what true healing often looks like. It's not a clean, linear process. It's not a perfectly scripted cinematic moment with a swelling orchestral score. It's messy, it's complicated, it's filled with unexpected twists and lingering shadows. But it's real. And in its own imperfect, hard-won way, it is profoundly, deeply enough. A life measured by someone else's ruler, by their outdated expectations and limited understanding, is finally over for me. My worth, I now know with unshakable certainty, is determined by me, by my own achievements, my own integrity, my own internal compass. And so, consequently, is my future. So, if you are out there, if you're listening to this and you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, the perpetual disappointment, the miscalculation, the odd one out whose passions were dismissed and whose talents were overlooked, please know this, deep in your bones. You do not have to earn someone else's love or approval to be inherently, magnificently worthy of it. Your value is not contingent on their validation. Walk tall, even when your knees are shaking. Walk forward into the life you deserve, the life you build for yourself. And if you absolutely need to, if it's the only way to preserve your spirit and reclaim your truth, find the courage to walk away. Not in defeat, but in quiet, powerful self-liberation. It's a strange and often unsettling truth how real endings, the truly significant ones, rarely feel like the dramatic, conclusive endings we see in movies when they actually happen. You anticipate them to be loud, definitive, perhaps even cinematic, complete with a clear resolution, and fade to black. But more often than not, they arrive in the quietest of moments, unannounced, in the mundane rhythm of ordinary life. They slip in on a Tuesday afternoon while you're folding laundry, or during a quiet Sunday morning coffee when your phone doesn't ring with the call you once desperately awaited, and you realize, with a startling sense of peace, that you are finally, truly okay with that silence. 3 months, a full season, had passed since my father's, William Hayes' ill-fated retirement party at the Grand Astoria Hotel. 3 months since that highly charged night, I stood before him and handed him not a prettily wrapped box, but the unvarnished, painful truth in the form of a child's mathematics puzzle and a daughter's stark, accusatory note. 3 months since I had consciously, irrevocably, stopped performing, stopped auditioning for the approval of a man who, it seemed, only ever reserved his applause, his genuine pride for my brothers, Ethan and Noah, and their contributions to Hayes and Sons construction. The echoes of that night had slowly begun to fade, replaced by the steady, demanding rhythm of my life in San Francisco. My story, or at least the dramatic, tech leak reported sliver of it from the retirement party, had indeed gained a surprising amount of traction online in certain circles. The initial buzz from that night, combined with the more recent, widely circulated video of my keynote speech at the Women in Tech WIT conference in San Francisco, had created a narrative. My words from the WIT keynote about uninstalling outdated expectations and the courage to define one's own worth were being shared extensively by women in technology groups, university STEM programs, engineering schools, and even prominent career coaching blogs aimed at empowering professional women. Then, an email landed in my Innovatech inbox from a senior journalist at Tech Forward magazine, one of the most respected and influential online publications covering the technology industry. They weren't just interested in a superficial recap of the viral moment at my father's party, or even just a summary of my WIT speech. They wanted to write an in-depth profile, they explained, exploring not only my work as the lead of the Orion Initiative and my career trajectory at Innovatech, but also delving into what it truly meant to grow up feeling intellectually and emotionally invisible within a traditional, patriarchal family structure dominated by a powerful father and his construction empire, and still emerge as a highly successful, visible leader in a cutting-edge, demanding field. They wanted to explore the journey of becoming someone worth seeing, even when your own family struggled to acknowledge your light. At first, a familiar wave of hesitation washed over me. The thought of laying bare such personal, painful aspects of my life for public consumption felt daunting, invasive. But then, as I reread the journalist's thoughtful, respectful email, I realized with a growing sense of conviction that this wasn't just my story anymore. It was, in many ways, the story of every young girl who was ever told her passion for math or science was not for girls. Every daughter whose intellectual achievements were downplayed while her brother's more practical pursuits were lauded. It was for every woman who sat silently in the back of the conference room while less qualified men took the spotlight. Every brilliant mind dismissed as too emotional, too difficult, or simply not enough because she didn't fit a preconceived mold. It was for every individual who had worked twice as hard for half the credit and still, somehow, found the resilience to show up day after day and continue to strive. So, after a long conversation with Chloe, who encouraged me to use my platform, I took a deep breath and replied to the journalist from Tech Forward magazine. I said yes. The Tech Forward magazine article, when it was finally published online a few weeks later, was titled with a deliberate, provocative irony that made me both wince and smile. The miscalculation who engineered her own success. Olivia Hayes on AI, innovation, and forging your own path. It opened, as I had anticipated, with a vivid recounting of the now infamous scene at my father's retirement gala at the Grand Astoria Hotel. Me, Olivia Hayes, the AI lead from Innovatech, calmly standing up after William Hayes' dismissive remarks, handing him the symbolic mathematics puzzle and the cutting note, and then walking away with quiet, unshakable dignity. But, as the journalist had promised, the article quickly moved beyond that single dramatic moment. What mattered more, what formed the true heart of the piece, was everything that came before and after. The years of quiet struggle, the relentless dedication to my work in data science and artificial intelligence, the challenges of navigating a male-dominated industry, the resilience forged in the crucible of familial disapproval, and ultimately the conscious, empowering choice to redefine my own worth, my own success, entirely on my own terms, far from the long shadow of Hayes and Sons construction. The journalist wove in details about my leadership on the Orion Initiative, my contributions to Innovatech, and my passion for mentoring other young women in STEM. One particular paragraph, towards the end of the lengthy profile, resonated with me so deeply that I read it over and over, the words sinking into my very core. It read, Olivia Hayes didn't so much burn bridges with the traditional, patriarchal world embodied by her father's construction empire. Rather, she simply stopped trying to build her entire existence according to their pre-approved, outdated blueprints. Instead, she courageously drafted her own, one based on algorithms of self-worth and architectures of fierce independence. That line, with its clever use of construction and architectural metaphors that so perfectly mirrored my father's world and my own deliberate divergence from it, stayed with me for days. Because for so many years, I had genuinely believed that setting boundaries, especially with family, was an act of selfishness. I thought that walking away from their deeply ingrained expectations from the future they had envisioned for a Hayes made me cold, ungrateful, or somehow deficient. But now, with a clarity that was as refreshing as the San Francisco fog rolling in over the hills, I finally understood. Boundaries aren't impenetrable walls designed to shut the world out in anger or fear. They are, in fact, more like carefully considered doorways. They are the conscious choices we make about what and whom we allow into our lives, what we nurture, and what, with courage and self-respect, we choose to walk away from. They define the space where we can thrive. Not long after the Tech Forward magazine article went live and began to circulate widely, I received a direct message on a professional networking site from a name I didn't immediately recognize, Isabella Rossi. The platform indicated we had a distant family connection. Then it clicked. Isabella. My cousin. My father William's sister's daughter. We had barely known each other, having met only a handful of times at large, chaotic Hayes family gatherings during our childhoods. Fleeting interactions lost in the blur of too many relatives. I knew her family, the Rossis, had a strong Italian heritage, and Aunt Maria, Dad's sister, had married into a family that was, if anything, even more traditional and patriarchal than our own. Isabella's message was heartfelt and surprisingly vulnerable. Olivia, it's your cousin, Isabella Rossi, it began. I just read the Tech Forward article about you. Your story. Mamma mia, it made me cry right here at my desk. You probably don't know this, or maybe you do, given our family, but my own pap, your Zio Antonio by marriage. He treated me and my sisters much the same way your father treated you. Always, always, it was about the boys. The sons, loro sono il futuro della famiglia. They are the future of the family. Girls? We were. Well, we were expected to be good, quiet, get married, and make beautiful babies. Our ambitions, our brains? Secondary. Decorative, at best. I've spent so many years feeling suffocated by it all, by the weight of tradition and expectation in our Italian-American world. Seeing what you did, reading about your courage to speak your truth to Uncle William, to build such an incredible career at Innovatech despite it all. It was like a light bulb went on. I wish, oh, how I wish I'd had even a fraction of your courage years ago. Maybe I wouldn't feel so stuck. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for showing me, for showing all of us who live in these shadows, that it's not too late to try and rewrite our own stories, to find our own voices. Tears pricked my own eyes as I read her words, the raw honesty of her shared experience creating an unexpected, powerful bond across the miles and the years of silence. I typed back a reply, my fingers moving quickly, the words coming straight from my newly fortified heart. Isabella, I wrote, thank you for reaching out. And please know, it is absolutely, unequivocally, never too late to stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces where you were never meant to be confined. That's the part about healing that nobody really prepares you for, isn't it? You don't just magically heal all at once, like flipping a switch from broken to fixed. It's far more like a dimmer switch, slowly, almost imperceptibly, being turned up over a long period. Some days are undeniably bright, filled with clarity and a sense of buoyant freedom. Other days, unexpected shadows creep in, old aches resurface, and the light feels dim, almost threatening to go out. But gradually, painstakingly, bit by bit, the overall illumination builds, becomes more resilient, more constant. I still hadn't spoken directly to my father, William Hayes, since receiving that terse, almost painfully brief note he'd sent by a mom. The one with no photograph, just those few jagged words. That mathematics puzzle. It was indeed difficult. I was wrong, I'm sorry. It hadn't contained any declarations of love, no sudden outpouring of fatherly affection I'd once dreamed of. It hadn't asked to meet, to talk further, to mend the colossal rift between us. But in its own stark, broken, and quintessentially William Hayes way, it had communicated something profound. It had said, perhaps, I acknowledge my error. It had hinted, I see some part of it now. And honestly, as I continued to move forward with my life in San Francisco, focused on my work at Innovatech and the upcoming WIT conference, that sliver of acknowledgement, however imperfect, was enough. It was enough because I no longer desperately needed him to say all the right words, the words I used to script for him in my daydreams. I had finally, blessedly, stopped waiting for his permission, his validation, to feel worthy, to feel whole. I had learned, through a long and arduous process, to speak those essential, life-affirming words of value and acceptance to myself. And my own voice, I was discovering, was far more powerful and convincing than his had ever been. I am learning to love who I've become. I am learning to deeply appreciate, even admire, the resilient girl who kept showing up, day after day, year after year. Even when no one in her own family clapped for her achievements in mathematics or computer science. I cherished the woman who finally stopped asking, begging to be chosen, to be seen, and instead found the profound strength and clarity to start choosing herself every single day. The next time I found myself flying east, it wasn't for a tense family obligation in Bridgeport. In fact, my destination was Bridgeport, but the purpose was entirely different, entirely mine. I had been invited to participate in a panel discussion at a local university there, one not nearly as prestigious as Stanford, but one that served a diverse community. The panel was titled Forging Your Future: Women, STEM, and Overcoming Obstacles. My fellow panelists were impressive, but my story, especially with the tech-forward article having made local ripples, seemed to particularly resonate. The audience was filled with bright-eyed young women, aspiring engineers, data scientists, programmers, many of them first-generation college students. Their faces a mixture of hope, determination, and the familiar anxiety of dreamers with scraped knees and brilliant, hungry minds. I looked out at them, saw my younger self reflected in their eager expressions, and I told them the unvarnished truth, the lessons learned in the fire. I told them that sometimes, yes, your biggest, most persistent obstacle can indeed wear your own last name, can sit across from you at the dinner table. I shared that the fleeting satisfaction of proving other people wrong pales in comparison to the deep, abiding power of proving yourself right, of living in alignment with your own values and capabilities. And I emphasized, with all the conviction I possessed, that no matter where you start, no matter who misunderstands or ignores you, no matter if your passion is for building skyscrapers or crafting elegant algorithms, you are never, ever a failure simply for being different, for choosing an unexpected path. You are only truly in danger of failing if you stop showing up authentically and courageously for yourself. The applause that followed was heartfelt, and the Q&A session was filled with insightful, sometimes painful, questions from young women navigating their own complex journeys. After the panel discussion concluded and the formal Q&A session ended, a young woman, probably no older than 19, with bright, intelligent eyes that held a familiar flicker of uncertainty, shyly approached me. She clutched a worn notebook to her chest, her knuckles white. "Ms. Hayes," she began, her voice a little shaky but determined. "Thank you. Your story. It really meant a lot to me. I have a father who Well, he doesn't understand my wanting to go into software engineering. He thinks it's not substantial. She took a deep breath. How did you? How did you finally know when it was time to stop trying to win his approval? Your father's approval. I looked at her earnest, searching face, and a gentle, knowing smile touched my lips. The answer, I realized, was simpler and more profound than any complex strategy I could have devised. I didn't consciously decide to stop trying, I said softly, meeting her gaze. There wasn't one single lightning bolt moment of, I'm done with seeking his approval. It was much quieter than that. I paused, then continued. I just woke up one day, not too long ago, and in the quiet stillness of my own morning, I realized, with a clarity that was both startling and incredibly peaceful, that I already had all the approval I truly needed. It wasn't his anymore. It was mine. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even hope, dawning within them. And in that small, shared moment of recognition, I knew my journey, however painful, had found yet another layer of purpose.